Minecraft Snapshot 23w04a has arrived with a brand new experimental smithing overhaul and armor trims to customize your armor. My name is Slime, let me show you all the news in 23w04a. Let's start with these experimental changes. For now, these changes are only available if you switch the Experimental Update 120 pack on, and these features will only release fully in Update 1.20. Anyway, the smithing table has been changed. You now have 3 input slots instead of 2, the first one being for a new item called a smithing template. These templates can be found in structures all over the world. To upgrade a diamond piece to netherite, you need a netherite upgrade smithing template, which can be found in some bastion remnant chests, with one being guaranteed in each treasure room bastion chest. A number of other new smithing templates have been added. Each one of these is a pattern for adding a trim to an armor piece. A trim pattern, an armor piece, and a metal ingot or crystal item combine into a pattern on the armor depending on the smithing template used, and a color depending on the mineral used. When placing these items in the smithing table, you can also see a preview on an armor stand of how the resulting item will look. The icon for the trimmed armor is always the same regardless of which pattern was used. Trims can be applied to any armor except leather armor. These trims are purely there to make you look absolutely fabulous. They offer no change in gameplay. Hovering your cursor over a trimmed item in the inventory will show you what pattern and material was used. You can use a wide range of materials to apply the trim to your armor pieces. The available colors are iron, copper, gold, lapis, emerald, diamond, netherite, redstone, amethyst, and quartz. But it has to be different than the armor you're applying it to, so you can't put a diamond trim on a diamond armor, for instance. When you craft the armor trim onto the armor, all the inputs are consumed. However, you can also duplicate the templates before using them. That is done in a crafting table by placing the template, 7 diamonds, and a stone of the base type for that template. This gives you back 2 smithing templates. There are 11 different armor trim smithing templates. The different patterns are unique per structure, so you'll need to loot a number of different places to get all the possible patterns. Also, the chances of getting these aren't uniform, so some will be harder to get than others. The Sentry armor trim is found in Pillager outposts. To duplicate this, you'll need a cobblestone. The Dune armor trim is found in desert pyramids. To duplicate it, you'll need a sandstone. The Coast armor trim is found in shipwrecks. You'll want a cobblestone to duplicate this one. Jungle temple chests can have the Wild armor trim, which is then duplicated using mossy cobble. The Tide armor trim is found in ocean monuments, but those don't have chests. Don't you worry, the pattern has a 20% chance of dropping as loot from an Elder Guardian. You'll need Prismarine to duplicate it. The Ward armor trim is found in ancient cities. That is duplicated using Deep Slate. Woodland mansions contain the Vex armor trim, which is duplicated using cobblestone. Time to check out the Nether. You can find the Rib armor trim as Nether Fortress loot, which is duplicated using Netherrack. Bastion remnants can have the Snout armor trim, which is duplicated using Blackstone. As I mentioned before, they can also have the Netherite upgrade smithing template, which is duplicated using Netherrack. Strongholds can have the Eye armor trim. That is duplicated using Endstone. And finally, the Spire armor trim is found in End cities and is duplicated using Purpur blocks. There is one exception to the trims not being available on armor of the same material. If you put netherite trims onto diamond armor and then upgrade that armor to netherite, you currently do get netherite trims on netherite armor. One last thing before we move on from the trims. Having gold trim on your armor is not fancy enough to pacify piglins. That is some awesome stuff, and if you've enjoyed this showcase this far, please trim a click pattern onto the like button for this video. It really does help, so I really appreciate it. In visual news, the Enchantment Glint has been tweaked to be more subtle than before. A couple of gameplay bug fixes in this version. All goat horns turned into the Ponder goat horn in the previous snapshot. That is now fixed. And the blast protection now reduces explosion knockback properly. A couple of minor user interface fixes too. The narrator button is now grayed out if the narrator is not available, and you can now select out-of-date resource packs on the resource pack screen when using keyboard navigation. The example text for enabling structures now lists shipwrecks as an example instead of dungeons, which aren't actually structures. In datapack news, there are two new recipe types for the new armor trim recipes. They are Smithing Transform and Smithing Trim, both with base, addition, and template fields. There are also two new registries which let you add new armor trims in datapacks: Trim Material and Trim Pattern. Let's start with Trim Pattern. Each file has an asset ID field, which is a namespace ID used to find the asset to draw the trim. This means that if you add a trim type in a datapack, there also needs to be a corresponding resource pack with these assets. Trim pattern files also have a template item field and a description field, which is a text component that is used to display the text when hovering over a trimmed item. Trim materials can also be added. Each file has an asset name field, which is used as a suffix for armor trim texture locations. They also have a description component for hovered items and an item model index used to change the visuals for that material. They also have an ingredient field defining the ingredient material, and optionally can have an incompatible armor material field. Of course, resource packs also have new options for these trims. There's a new Atlas configuration source called Paletted Permutations. It's used to dynamically generate new textures based on a set of color palettes. Color palettes allow you to swap out the colors of a texture without having to supply all files for the variants of a texture in a resource pack, which is useful for things like armor trims, where you want to be able to change the color of parts of the armor without having to create a new texture for each color. The Paletted Permutations source has a Textures field, which is a list of namespace location of base textures to generate variants for. There's also a Palette Key field, which is an ID of the color palette file, which defines the colors to swap for new ones. Permutations is a map of permutations from suffix to namespace location of a color palette file. Once you've defined a Paletted Permutations source, you can then reference those namespace output textures in other resources in your resource pack. In data news, a new flag value has been added to the Hide Flags NBT field of items. Setting the bit valued 128 will hide armor trim information from tooltips. In tag news, the Update 120 pack introduces 3 new item tags: Trim Materials, Trim Templates, and Trimmable Armor. And let's wrap up with some command news. There is a new relation for the execute on command introduced in last week's snapshot called origin. The origin of an entity usually traces it back to its source, so for projectile it's the entity that fired the projectile. This also includes throwables like potions. For items, it's the entity that threw it. If the executing entity is an area effect cloud, the origin is the source of the effect, which could be whoever threw a lingering potion or the Ender Dragon. If the entity is primed TNT, the origin is the entity who lit the fuse. And in the case the executing entity is a Vex or Evoker Fangs, the origin is the entity who summoned it. And that, my friends, is where we wrap up 23w04a. My name is Sliced Lime, thank you for watching, I'll see you next time.